Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, People, Pathways, and Partnerships, Building Cybersecurity Resiliency. I'm Fred Clark, president of Bridgewater State University, and I want to thank our good friends at the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative and their executive director, Carolyn Kirk, for co-sponsoring this event, and the Boston Globe for including this webinar as part of Tech Week. Every day we see news reports of ransomware and malware attacks on public institutions, such as the City of Lowell, and on private and nonprofit organizations across all industries. No one is immune. As in the pandemic, we need people and organizations to practice good cyber hygiene and build the vaccines in the form of training, systems, and workforce to help inoculate ourselves from attacks. Cybersecurity is multifaceted, and we often think first of the technological dimensions of the problem, which of course are important. But today's webinar focuses on people, the need to build a strong cybersecurity workforce and forge partnerships as part of a larger ecosystem approach to cybersecurity. Today's webinar is also a reminder that cybersecurity is not a one-off. It requires constant and sustained investment and attention. At BSU, working with our partners at CyberTrust Massachusetts and with federal and state legislators and officials, we are investing in a tripartite approach, offering excellent academic programs at both the undergraduate and graduate levels, constructing one of the most advanced cyber ranges in the country, and hosting one of 4 security operations centers in the state. I want to thank our outstanding panelists and our audience for joining us today for this critical topic. Let me turn it over to our extraordinary moderator, Maggie McAlpine from the Center for Threat-Informed Defense at MITRE Ingenuity. Maggie?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Fred. So I have the very great honor today of introducing our wonderful panelists, who I'll be going through one by one, starting with Megan Martinez. Megan Martinez was recently named the Director of Cyber Range Programs at CyberTrust Massachusetts. With over a decade of experience in the cybersecurity space, including both public and private sectors, Megan is passionate about breaking down barriers to entry into the cyber workforce and supporting mentorship and sponsorship for historically marginalized communities. We are also joined by Gary Evie, the founder and CEO of Evie Security Consulting Group. With over 25 years of experience in information technology, Gary is a leading cybersecurity expert helping organizations protect themselves from malicious cyber threats. One of his many roles is as a cybersecurity advisor to several institutions of higher learning, and he created the first cybersecurity and technology diversity conference in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And finally, we're joined by Steve Zaromsky, the Vice President of Information Technology and CIO at Bridgewater State University. He has played an integral role at establishing the school's cybersecurity bachelor's degree program, as well as launching 2 training facilities on the school's campus, the Cyber Range and Security Operations Center. Thank you all, and please feel free to turn your cameras and microphones on as we get this panel started. All right. Thank you again for joining us. So just in the interest of getting this really exciting discussion underway, I know for myself that I'm fascinated to hear the insights from our panelists. So let's dive right in. Our first question is, many on this panel and as attendees on this webinar know of the digital vulnerabilities in cybersecurity. But in terms of the solutions to these vulnerabilities that can be found in people, pathways, and partnerships, what does this group see as the keys to solving or strengthening some of these vulnerabilities? And Gary, I'm going to let you start.
Thank you, Maggie. Pleasure to be here. And thank you to Bridgewater and Carolyn Kirk for the Mass Tech Collaborative for putting this event together. So in my opinion, the greatest vulnerability and threat that we see across the cybersecurity landscape is really the people factor, right? People to us is the most important thing when it comes to both offense and defense. And it's the unfortunate truth is that we have a shortage of cybersecurity practitioners and professionals in this field to be able to address some of the challenges that we see in the cybersecurity landscape. And addressing that shortage requires sort of a combination of different stakeholders partnering and collaborating together to address the issues that we're seeing. And those issues are pretty complex, right? As President Clark pointed out, we're seeing increasing sophistication that are taking down towns and schools and parts of our critical infrastructure. And a sheer fact is that unless we actually find ways to better collaborate and partner, it is going to be very challenging as we go forward to be able to minimize the impact to things like our national security. And so for me, one of the things I always like to say is that cybersecurity to me is a national security issue, and people, again, are the most important factor. And if we think about our military as an example, to really conduct a military operation, you can't have the Army sort of, or any independent part sort of going off on its own. The Army is going to require air support, right, from, the Air Force, and our special units will require intelligence support. But it does require sort of collaboration across the different forces in order to be able to combat any threat that we see out there. And cybersecurity is very much the same. It requires sort of that partnership, that collaboration. In our case, it's between academia and industry and government as well. So strong alliances are really, really important. And the other part that I kind of see is just the other thread is just we have to move towards having more inclusivity in this particular space. And right now, it's a space where it is grossly underrepresented. And if I sort of remain with this theme around the military, what we'll find is that if we take World War II as an example, we could not have won World War II if America sort of fielded an army or a military just full of white men, as an example, right? We needed folks with unique expertise, unique set of skills, unique perspectives to be involved in tackling one of the greatest threats to our national security during World War II. And again, cybersecurity, in my estimation, is very much a bit of the same.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Maggie.
I was gonna say, please pick this one up, Megan. I think you have a lot to add.
Yeah, no, Gary, I mean, so many great points there. I think on top of that, when you hear people talk about cyber threats and cyber vulnerabilities, one of the next key phrases that you'll hear oftentimes is, how we're going to mitigate that by our resiliency, building, our cybersecurity resiliency. And, to Gary's point, so often we talk about that in terms of tools or, this latest technology. We're going to talk and touch on a little bit later, the almighty, AI. But, the underlying point here that Gary and that we all, on this panel share is that it's really about the people. And so particularly, Cyber Trust's view and the view of that of our, partners and people that are collaborating with us is that building cyber resiliency comes down to the people we're bringing in, meeting people and calling people in with diverse experiences. And that as a result of that also have, different barriers that we need to address head on. We need to meet them where they're at. We need to build clear roadmaps for them so they understand that regardless of kind of what their learning journey is, they understand these are the areas and these are the points that I can go to in terms of a career. This is how exactly I can get there, whether it's through a 2-year program, a 4-year program, a boot camp, an apprenticeship. There's so many possibilities. And we do all of that by building these partnerships together with our institutions, with our technology and our business partners to come together to build creative and innovative solutions to a problem and a threat that exists for everyone, regardless of what industry that you're in.
I'll just add to that, Maggie, if that's all right, and to the points that Megan and Gary have pointed out here, there's over 20,000 open positions in Massachusetts related to cybersecurity, according to CyberSeek. Outside of Massachusetts, we're over 755,000. So to Gary's point, this really is a crisis here that we need to address. And I kind of look at it through, an enterprise risk management lens here, and the risk here is obviously not only the ongoing threats that continue to happen, but the real risk here is the people, right? You can't, we talked about tools earlier. You can't just continue to invest in more and more and more tools and think that this is going to solve the problem, right? And too frequently, though, we see that continuing to be the case. And then these tools, which are great, I love tools too, but when the tools aren't used by the people that need to use them, and then you're not getting the value and the return on investment, they're not providing the benefits that they're intended to serve. So it really comes down to here. The one thing that I really want to do here is a little bit on what Bridgewater State is doing in various parts. So Bridgewater State, with tremendous support from Cybertrust Massachusetts and our state legislators, is building out a security operations center and a cyber range on our campus in Bridgewater. And so we think that's a really amazing opportunity for students, where they're going to be able to come to Bridgewater State, get access to a very affordable quality education within cyber or computer science or whatever pathway they choose. But then they're going to get access to the cyber range, where they can actually experience real life, hands-on threats and watch it unfold and get that hands-on experience that they otherwise not might have had access to. And then really the other part here that speaks to the partnerships is the security operations centers that we're building, right? So those are really designed, again, with tremendous support from the state legislature and Cybertrust and Mass Cyber, but we're building out a physical SOC on the Bridgewater State campus and on the other areas across different regions across the state, where students are going to actually be able to work in the SOC, right? And those are obviously the live events. So now they're getting the high quality education, they're getting their time on the range, and then they're going in and they're working in the SOC, and then they're going to get a really good job. So it's really about just providing those different opportunities to students.
I mean, I certainly wish that SOC could have been available when I was in college. And I think these are fantastic opportunities that you are all providing. And I especially liked Gary and Megan picked up on this point around the importance of the diversity of that workforce. You can't fill it all with just one group, for example, but also just the diversity of perspective, concerns around privacy, concerns around the risks that are out there are going to be strengthened and informed by a wider array of experts coming into the field. So I really applaud the thought and the work our three experts have already put into this incredibly critical problem. I think, does anyone want to close out on that question before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I just kind of add something to point. One of the services I think that we do in this industry is we spend a lot of time gravitating around tools and the next shiny object. RSA, which is sort of the holy grail for cybersecurity practitioners, happened a couple of weeks ago, and you probably walk through the showroom floor, the conference floor out there, you'll see thousands of different products and solutions, and there's billions that are spent each year on cybersecurity tools, as Steve pointed out. But the reality is that we're still seeing breaches happening every day on an ongoing basis. And then a lot of it just comes back to the fact that we still have not spent enough time focused on the people factor, right? And so the work that's happening at Bridgewater, the work that's being kicked off here by Cybertrust Massachusetts, is really getting at the heart of how do we make sure that we're closing this widening skill gap that we have? How do we close that shortage in talent? And I actually don't like to use the word talent, really, as it's more around finding, actually opening up opportunities for folks that may not necessarily have opportunities or thought about exploring this space. So to Steve's point, I love it, which is we need to sort of move away from thinking just solely about this problem around cybersecurity is going to be solved by spending millions and millions or billions, right, on tools. But we've got to put, I think, more attention on the people factor.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Absolutely. And I think that actually flows into our next question really well, which is, so we all agree, we have to bolster this workforce, we have to improve this resilience. But when it comes to developing that workforce, how can we propose solutions and new ideas? What are ways to close that hands-on gap and enable more practitioners? And I wanted to start with you, Megan, if you'd like to start us off.
Sure. When I think about this question, and I think about it a lot, as I'm sure many of you do that are joining this conversation, is that in some ways, I think the question is less like, where do we get the ideas, or what are the ideas themselves? Because if you take a look, there are examples of it every day. And, you know, one of the eye-opening ones for me that I always look to as kind of my hallmark of, again, creativity and innovation is Slack has an apprenticeship program with, I believe it's San Quentin prison out in California. Like, for cybersecurity related jobs. I mean, how interesting and, you know, kind of cutting edge is that? But so I think the question is less like, where are the ideas and what are those ideas? And it's more of, do we have the courage really to recognize and invest and implement them? And I think that that's what we're really doing here, is bringing together the core players in the Commonwealth to say, yes, we do. And here's how we're going to partner together. And for me, you know, I come from the DFIR space. You know, most recently I was involved in a lot of digital equity work happening nationally and in Massachusetts. And I think, at least speaking for myself and those of us that are in this cybersecurity and in this technology space, we take for granted the fact that there's, I think as of the last census, there were like 18 million households that don't have connectivity to broadband internet. And then as a result, then often don't have the technology to use it, and subsequently don't have the skills to use it. And so when we talk about really being creative and really trying to get a more diverse group of people that can help fill these jobs and help create the sustainable pipeline, we need to really think about starting at the beginning and rooting ourselves in this principle of digital equity, connecting people that are unconnected, and starting as early as possible. I was talking with some representatives from Women in Cybersecurity, and they're really looking at starting, you know, I'm of the mind earlier than college. We need to look and start at least at middle and high school, so that way students understand what the opportunities are, so that way they can pick, you know, do their due diligence and pick a program that's right for them. But the folks at Wixis were telling me that they're looking even earlier at elementary school, because, you know, when their mission is trying to get more women in cybersecurity, and they're finding that young girls, you know, when they're in those early elementary grades, they're getting discouraged and being socially, you know, kind of pushed out of STEM and technical roles. And so the earlier we can start, the earlier we can start to understand what the challenges are. You know, I am very privileged. I came from a very privileged background. You know, I worked a part-time job just to keep myself, you know, to have some spending money. I went to school, you know, got out with somewhat minimal loans. But that's not the case for everyone. We've got, you know, such a high and mixed population. I know, you know, and Steve can talk a little bit more, but Bridgewater State, they have a lot of older students, you know, that are balancing work and family. And what are those challenges that they're looking at that, you know, they have such a diverse way of thinking and a unique perspective and unique experiences that could help make them excellent cyber professionals, excellent analysts, threat intel folks, but the life and the living and the some of the systemic challenges that are in their way. So, you know, I think the other piece of that Steve and Gary mentioned too is that we need to be clear about what these challenges are. We need to be clear about where the folks are that we want to reach and we want to help lift up. And we also have to be clear about what's going to give them the most success and give them the most potential to land a job outside. And, you know, here at CyberTrust, and we believe that, you know, a key component of that is the experiential learning, the experience that they'll get on the in the Security Operations Center, but also the experience they're going to get with the cyber range technology. You know, that gives them a safe platform where they can break things, you know, and learn kind of the hard way. But it also gives them access to real world tools. So often are we looking at students that are dealing with open source tools, free tools, because they can't afford to pay for them. But our, you know, state-of-the-art range gives them access to real world tools so they can get out and say, I know, you know, if you're a Cisco shop, if you're a Rapid7 shop, whatever, I have experience using those tools. And here's how I can be a value add right out of school for you.
If I could just add on to
Please
that,
do.
you know, Megan hit a lot of great points there. I just, to focus really more in on the K through 12 piece, you know, I think if we're able to do more in that space about engaging students earlier on, I can tell you there's many, many times where we've had college students come in and they honestly don't really, when I ask the question, have you thought of cyber? Oftentimes it's no. And then when I ask why, they think about this, you know, typical figure of someone in a dark room with a hoodie on. And that is not the case at all. When I start to explain to them all of the different, you know, tracks that you can actually go down in cyber and all the different opportunities that are available, it's kind of like this aha moment for them. And then they start to really get interested. And I can tell you for sure, we've had several students that have come through Bridgewater State, not even majoring in technical degrees to begin with. We've mentored them, we've showed them the way, and then they go out making very high paying jobs. And so it does really come back down to opportunity here. But if we are able to engage students earlier on, you know, cyber is a multidisciplinary field, right? You can't, you need to know, obviously, you have to be strong in networking, right? You have to be strong in systems administration. You have to obviously know the cyber discipline in of itself. So if students are able to get exposed to these competencies and these topics earlier on, and then when they come to either a 2-year school or a 4-year school like Bridgewater State, they already have a really, they're coming in with an advantage and they can really hit the ground running. The other thing I want to talk about too is just to go back to the range a little bit, Megan. You know, when our range is going to be opening up, fingers crossed, in later on this fall, which we're really excited about. That's the physical range, and that range is not just for Bridgewater State University students, right? This range, the Commonwealth has made an investment here, and Bridgewater State and Cyber Trust want to be a resource for the entire Commonwealth, and we want to provide opportunities, again, not just for our students, but we want law enforcement to come use the range. We want municipalities to come to use the range. We want private business to come to use the range. And cyber intersects with any and all verticals and industries. And so really there's a true opportunity here for us all to come together and partner on this and provide access to those tools that generally aren't available to most individuals. But fortunately, we do have access to those here. So.
Yeah. No, and I think that, you know, to Gary's point earlier about how this is a national, you know, cybersecurity is a national security issue, you know, that is exactly the point, is that when we all partner together, right, regardless of industry and regardless of, you know, program, we are helping, you know, we are helping everybody. We are helping secure this country. We are helping secure the Commonwealth. And, you know, that's, again, that's good for everybody in terms of the learning experience, and then also the benefits on the flip side.
Yeah, I'll kind of offer up, I think, you know, this is, I applaud what Megan and Steve are doing. They're doing really, I call champions work. And I wish that when I was coming through high school here, you know, there was a Cyber Trust and a Bridgewater that really created sort of these opportunity pathways, right, for folks like myself. I've been in the cybersecurity space for, you know, over 25 years. I didn't start out by thinking about cyber. I was a political science major. I went to college thinking that I would venture into sort of law and stumbled into an opportunity at a company called Lotus that was soon acquired by IBM, and discovered cyber back in the mid 1990s with a software application called IBM Antivirus that was later became Norton Antivirus. That's how I sort of stumbled into this space, and I've loved it. The challenge I think that we have, and Steve and Megan touched upon it, is that too many of I think folks in our sort of underrepresented communities, historically marginalized communities, aren't thinking about this as a career path. And so we now need to think differently about how we engage and bring more of those particular demographics into this space. As I mentioned earlier, we cannot address this national security issue unless we have more representation at the table. And so the Bridgewaters and the Cyber Trust Massachusetts efforts has to be met, right, by government and by private industry, right, who also share sort and value this mission of inclusivity. And so the work that's being taken on requires employers to create internship opportunities, right? They're going to require employers to make investments in providing knowledge-based resources to the Bridgewaters and some of the other colleges around the Commonwealth. It's going to require engaging in community organizations to specifically target individuals who are, again, not currently reflected in our ecosystem. And so to me, when I look back at my journey was only made possible, right, because an employer created an opportunity, right? And I stepped foot into that opportunity 25 years later. I've been able to thrive and succeed, and it's changed the trajectory of my life and that of my family. And I think that that's actually very possible through the work that's taking place here today.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about pathways, when we talk about them in terms of the availability, what they are, what those look like, we need to be very specific when we're talking with communities and with potential folks that are interested in these jobs. What is it? What does it look like? I think very often, I think we can all sympathize with, what was it, CSI Cyber, when that came out, and kind of cringing of, this is not reality, or the Criminal Minds, or, those types of things. And so I think we need to be clear as an industry, as, folks that are invested in this workforce development, in terms of what is cybersecurity specifically? What are the roles and job roles that are in it? I was in the, kind of more operation space, SOC analysts, DFIR, folks, offensive security, pen testers, but there's such a wide spectrum. You've got, often overlooked, governance, audit, cyber threat intelligence, which is where I originally went back to school, and is, an area that I love, that I think gets overlooked a lot. So I think we need to be clear. We need to circulate a common language more, and then be clear about, okay, if you want to get here to be a SOC analyst, here's the different programs, here's the different, we can talk about certifications, here's the way to get there. Once you're there, it doesn't just end there. Here are then other areas that you can grow into, because cybersecurity, the landscape is always changing. And so I think one way in terms of keeping talent both at a company and keeping talent, in our industry, is about continuing to offer those opportunities for growth. And so if you're interested in learning something on top of your network security admin roles, here's another avenue you could go into.
Absolutely. And I really appreciated that point, Megan, around, sort of that guidance, because I feel like we are still a field where a lot of people have strange and interesting stories about how they got into cybersecurity. It's always fascinating to hear how people got into it via, sometimes from compliance, or sometimes from just through IT is a very common field. But it's actually, in my view, a problem that so many people have interesting stories. It's fascinating, but it's a problem because, a lot of, say, lawyers or doctors don't have interesting stories. They do their residence, they do their internships, and they work their way up in a very methodical manner. And that's also incredibly important to this equity and to the filling this skill gap, and making sure that, people can access that without needing to find a mentor at a bar somewhere, or just sort of stumble into it backwards. I was an English major. I also have a strange story if we ever were to have time for it. And I think this is important too, because cybersecurity, and this is going to dovetail into our next question, because cybersecurity is such a good way. It is a good career. It has advancement. We need more, not less. Not every career can say that. And to the actual question, we have these high demand careers that can lead to high paying jobs and eventually, generational wealth, which is incredibly important to equity. What can organizations do to ensure their workforces stay diverse and these opportunities go to spreading equity across the state? And Gary, you volunteered to go first on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And as I shared earlier, I'm a beneficiary, right, of that, creating those opportunities and those opportunities at IBM, which I was fortunate to work for a number of years. really sort of changed my trajectory. And so I think, Megan hit on a couple of these, right? And I think one is, how do we sort of work towards promoting diversity from the recruitment stage, right? Really early on. And I think that when I talk to a lot of employers, unfortunately, not many employers actually use diverse sourcing channels, right, to go after talent. And I think that, one is there needs to be understanding of what are sort of the different sourcing, channels that are out there. So diversifying that, I think, is important. How do you ensure that once you bring an individual or an employee into your organization, you have the ability to retain that individual, right, along the way? And so that's the other element of it, which is the inclusivity. And again, Megan, so I think touched upon so nicely, is that you have to give them an opportunity to see growth opportunities, right? That is absolutely sort of a critical step. And then I think the other important factor, and again, just kind of reflecting back on sort of my growth and my development, it is really about how do you also provide mentorship, right, and sponsorship. And there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship, right? You can have individuals who mentor you through projects and initiatives, right, within the organization. But sponsorships are folks who say, hey, listen, we think that you have growth potential and we're going to create these opportunities for you to grow within the organization. And that is just as important. So creating those mentorship and sponsorship opportunities are really, really essential. And so when I think back at all of these, Steve mentioned the 20,000 jobs that are available. These are high paying jobs, right? That quite frankly can transform the lives of families in and around these various communities that we have here in Massachusetts. One thing, and the last point, I'll finish up here. One of the things, Boston Globe, I think a while back, did a great article on the net worth, right, of African Americans here in the Commonwealth. $8, right? $8. That was the essential net worth of African Americans here in and around the Boston area. The jobs that we're talking about, right? The jobs that we're talking about are close to six-figure paying salaries, right? Six-figure paying salaries. So we've got to figure out how to actually move more and more folks into recognizing the opportunities that exist here and creating those pathways, as we discussed earlier, to places like Bridgewater's and some of the other, I think, colleges that we have here in the Commonwealth. I think that is the stuff that actually can be transformational for individuals like myself and and others that look like me, as well as some of the other underrepresented and marginalized groups here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think Gary touched on so many points that are salient. I think about, I'm going to be 38 this year, and it wasn't until 2 years ago, I think, that I saw someone that looked like me reflected, in a high position, right? We just don't see a lot of faces that look like the world that we live in. And so, we need to talk. I have no expectation, right, that, a Fortune 100 company that's been around for 200 years is going to have, a full C-suite that is, all the colors of the rainbow. But, seeing people of color, people from, marginalized groups in leadership positions, and also knowing that when I'm with a company that there is a path to growth, not just professional growth, but leadership growth and leadership opportunities. Those are the types of things that when we talk about not just getting people in the door, but having them stay and really contribute to an inclusive culture, homegrown culture in an organization. Those are some things that I think are so important. Another thing that Gary mentioned in terms of, talking about hiring and how we're getting talent, I worry with, as the height of the pandemic has kind of, waned, that with these hybrid models and going back to work, right, that really once again limits your talent. If we look at the greater Boston area, for example, and we look at how unaffordable it is for people. And so if we're asking people to come into the office, if we're asking people to be tied even 2-3 days a week to an office like that, that means you are limiting your pool by the people that live in that area, which means you are limiting the diversity of your candidates. Not to mention that, we have no HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities in New England. I didn't know about HBCUs probably until at least, 8-10 years ago. And so that's another source of, rich talent, right? That New England is just, crossing off the deck by some of these hiring models. So I think there's ways to be flexible there. I think when we think about the types of candidates now and the kind of some of the generational expectations and shifts, it's pretty well documented that these, Gen Z and even, what I cringe to say elder millennials like myself, there is a higher, expectation of DEI initiatives and kind of that societal investment and social justice. And so when I think also about creating an inclusive environment and finding and retaining talent, there are so many things that a company is probably already doing in terms of their community responsibility, their ESG and corporate social responsibility initiatives, so tying all of those together into a comprehensive program of how do we find, hire, retain, and embed some of those values into our organization. It's not going to happen overnight. We're seeing that organizations are struggling kind of with this right now, but really making some meaningful and holistic investments in that is going to go a long way.
Yeah, my perspective on this is, this is really where public higher education serves a role. And just as an example, at Bridgewater State, 30% of our students are people of color, and 80% of Bridgewater graduates continue to live and work in Massachusetts. That's a pretty big number. And so I think when employers are looking to diversify their workforce and to access talent, the answer is right in their backyard. Look to public higher education, because we provide those opportunities. The other thing I think that's really unique that we didn't really talk about too much too is the opportunities for apprenticeship programs, right? And so one of the things that we're starting to explore at Bridgewater State University is how we can provide students with access to an on-campus apprenticeship, right? So in this type of model, what students will do is they'll come. They may not know a lot about cyber at all, right? We talked about that earlier, but that's where a mentor comes in and really starts to show them the way and starts to explain the different opportunities. And then they come into, we're using the term professional apprentice right now, but that's when the student gets paired up with an apprentice. And then they start to identify, well, what are the core competencies? What are the core, expectations that we want this student to learn at the conclusion of the apprenticeship? And then they get paired up with the mentor. And then that's when they actually start to get the hands-on skills that they need to develop those competencies so that they can eventually even perhaps move on to a different apprenticeship outside working with an organization outside of Bridgewater State. So we've seen that model work very, very well so far. I gave an example of a couple of students that have come again to Bridgewater, not knowing and having really any background in cyber, didn't know what the opportunities were. We went through this program with them, and they ended up having job offers on the table prior to graduation, making six-figure salaries. So again, it's about opportunity. We've done this, and we're just really, really excited about the different things that we're doing here at Bridgewater State, and obviously with all the support of Cyber Trust in the Commonwealth.
And I think, Steve, to your point about the importance of apprenticeships and internships, it's that positive feedback loop that you're creating, right? Of, you, as the higher education institution, you have the baseline of what you want to deliver to your students, but then it's enriched by closing and narrowing that gap and increasing the communication with the business so they can help and provide that feedback, so that you can continue to produce students that are able to, regularly with vigor come out and get those six-figure jobs.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because, we'll often, we will work with industry. We'll ask them, what is that you're really looking for? What are those specific skill sets that you're looking for? And when we really take that feedback to heart, and then we can use that, we can incorporate it here in what we teach our students. So that way they really do come out, career ready. You talked earlier, Megan, about, some of the different tools, the importance of actually having access to the tools that students are going to use when they actually go out into the field. I think that's really where to touch back on the cyber range, where that's going to add a tremendous amount of value because, to your point, students get, they're not just coming out with the theoretical knowledge, they're getting the hands-on experience right through, whether it's Cisco routing and switching, Palo Alto firewalls, Carbon Black, whatever it is, Splunk, those are the actual tools that are used in the range in of itself. And then so it really does make a difference when they go out into the industry. We've heard that directly from employers.
Yeah, I think ISC Squared, I think in one of their workforce reports, they talked about, the average onboarding time, took at least like 7 to 9 months for a new hire, right? And so one of the things between the experiential learning and the SOC and the cyber range, companies that may be hesitant to, partner in terms of apprenticeships or internships, you're going to see that narrow. And so if you make the investment kind of earlier on and partner with CyberTrust and partner with our organizations to offer these opportunities, you're going to see those, that time narrow because of the opportunities that we're able to provide the students participating in our programs.
Agreed. And, actually, even you just made me think of something else is the role, I think colleges and universities really, we've had some success here with exposing students to different certification paths that they can also start to pursue right within cyber. So, come to Bridgewater State, we obviously are showing you the discipline, you're getting access to the range. Oh, what's the Security Plus thing that I can do? Well, let's show you, we're a CompTIA partner. And so we it's about those additional opportunities. And so you kind of, you're getting that the full gamut here, and so students are just getting, they're able to get the classroom instruction, the range, the SOC, they're getting industry certs, they're really getting the full menu of everything that they need to go out and become successful. So we're really excited about it.
Before we move on to our last question, we actually had one question I think actually fits a little bit better here while we're on this subject. We had somebody ask, what should students going to college and who are interested in cybersecurity know about this subject as a major, or what minor might they want to consider? Does anyone want to take that one before we move on to the final question?
I'll take that one. I'll start and feel free to jump in, Gary and Megan. So obviously it's a technical degree, right? You're certainly going into the technical space. I think that goes without saying. I think I talked about this earlier. It's really multidisciplinary. You're going to learn a magnitude of different concepts and tools and disciplines such as networking and systems administration and obviously cyber in and of itself. But I think the most important thing is talk with people who are in the field to learn about what potential career track you might want to go down, right? A SOC analyst or a cybersecurity analyst is one of the very common jobs, entry-level jobs within cyber that can lead into multiple different obviously different areas. And so talk with as many people as you can. If you can start early on, like we had talked about earlier, and start to gain some of those fundamental concepts and those skills, it's going to be a little bit you'll have a little bit more of a clearer transition once you come to somewhere like Bridgewater State. But just remember, you can do it. You can do it.
Yeah, I think for me, as I've, a lot of my cybersecurity work was in Rhode Island. And so as I'm learning and have learned over the years, the Massachusetts programs, we are really blessed in Massachusetts, one, to have so many different schools, so many different programs, really designed for any type of student, learner, adult, or, traditional student, someone pivoting, et cetera. I think what's been helpful for me are two things. One, to look at the NICE framework for work role categories. It's NICE. They kind of divide up cybersecurity roles into like 5 or 6 different categories. And then they break those categories down into what kind of roles usually funnel up into that. I also really like, I think Steve mentioned them earlier, CyberSeek. And one of the things that I really like about their tool, their kind of mapping tool, is that they really differentiate between when we look at open roles, what are roles that are true kind of entry level and like mid-level cybersecurity roles, and then what they term as feeder roles. And so Maggie, you had kind of mentioned this too, in terms of a lot of people end up starting out in like IT. Some of the best folks that I've worked with were started out as help desk folks, right? And then they pivoted into cybersecurity. And so understand a little bit about, what are you interested in? What are the programs out there and how are they different? One program may be more focused on governance, another one may be more focused on security analysts, et cetera. And which one's going to get you kind of more to where you think you want to end up, and what's the best way to get there. If you're starting from scratch, then you may want to go the IT help desk, take advantage of that, get into a company, and then leverage their continuing education opportunities to continue to build. Or do you have, are your circumstances where you can just start straight out at a Bridgewater State in the program that you want and take advantage of the opportunities there? So it does require, obviously all of us are interested in building and strengthening this ecosystem so these resources are more widely out there. But in terms of the reality we face today, I think for students, the onus is a little bit on them to understand what am I interested in, and where can I find that? What kind of role does that translate to? And then what's the best program in the Commonwealth to help me get there?
Yeah, so here's what I would offer up. I would offer up, just start. Just start, right? It's hard as I've got kids going to college, like the campus, and both of my kids didn't know what they wanted to do, right? I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got there. But I think what we appreciate and what makes the best cybersecurity practitioners great at what they do is they're inquisitive, right? They're inquisitive, like so you have to be inquisitive. And so I would say, Megan just gave you some great tools, right, to go out, look at the different roles and opportunities that are out there. But there are technical and non-technical roles, right? And you simply may not know where you want to go. And so I would encourage you to go out and to talk to individuals who are doing both technical and non-technical roles, right? Because a great example, we spent some time, the National Cybersecurity Director, it's not, that there are a number of folks in that office that don't have technical backgrounds, but what they do is extremely important to our overall national cybersecurity. Microsoft, you can name any of the big companies, IBM, they all have individuals, right, who are both technical and non-technical. So one of the things that I would say is start, be inquisitive, right? Go out, explore. Network is really important, right? We have the great fortune of things like LinkedIn as an example, right? Follow individuals who have interesting insights. And one of the amazing things about our industry, from a cybersecurity practitioner perspective, is that cyber practitioners love to give back, right? They absolutely love. I don't think I've met too many cybersecurity practitioners who don't enjoy spending time sharing their knowledge, sharing their expertise, talking about their journeys. And so if you find someone who you feel like, hey, I'd like to get to understand their role, their journey a bit better, how they got to where, reach out. I would guarantee you, I make this bet 10 out of 10 times, right? They will actually respond back to you and make time for you, right? And so now we don't necessarily have to meet in person. We've got the benefit of Zoom. You can do it virtually, right? You don't have to necessarily meet up for a cup of coffee at Starbucks. You can do that virtually, online. So that would be, my bit of advice.
Well, thank you for those fantastic answers. And just in that final spirit of inquiry, lightning round of an answer for this question. We have about 7 minutes before we need to get to closing remarks. It wouldn't be Tech Week unless we discuss the growing use of AI in the field regarding cybersecurity and the people, pathways, and partnerships that we're talking about here. Where do we see solutions coming from AI, if any? And this is one where I really hand it off to the panelists because I don't have answers nor claim to have them yet. So Steve, if you'd like to take us away.
Sure. I guess, to start by answering this, and like you said, lightning round. So I wasn't able to attend RSA this year, but I was reading through a lot of the material that it produced, and there was a survey that was conducted, and it started talking about, the difficulties on that cyber experts are starting to experience within their careers right now. And it started to ask about, is your career a little bit more difficult than it was 2 years ago? And the number one response from people, I think it was almost 80%, responded that their job was getting more complex, right? And so that's when I kind of started to think about, and the workload had increased. And we know certainly that's where AI has a lot of potential. It can process vast amounts of data very quickly, and it might be able to alleviate some of that repetitive workload, among analysts and other cyber professionals. With the threat landscape, is constantly changing. I think this is where AI can possibly start to make a difference. But we've got some big investors, organizations that are all in on this. Your IBMs, your Googles, and obviously they're going all in. They're also happen to be the primary investors of it. So, but I think it also takes a little. I think we're going to have to kind of see where this goes. It is absolutely going to have a role. There's no doubt about it. I think that, we're just going to have to give this a little bit more time to see how things play out. In my opinion, it's obviously going to be used in very good ways. It's obviously going to be used, unfortunately, in bad ways. But that doesn't mean we don't embrace the technology and continue to grow and adopt and evolve with it.
Gary, if you don't mind, I know we've shared some conversations, and I would like to end with you, I think, because I think your answer will really round us out. For me, I think, and something Gary will probably talk about, is we need to be responsible about building it, right? We're seeing the ramifications of that already. But I think we also need to be responsible about how we talk about it too, and what the reality is, what the potential is, kind of to what Steve's talking about. And so, when I hear about it and when I think about it, yes, there's a lot of great potential. But I think we also need to be mindful about, it's going to it's not going to, we're not on the cusp of having all of our jobs eliminated and being run and governed by robots, right? But what it does, to Steve's point, is in theory, it could make a lot of jobs a little bit easier. It could, help with some of that complexity, some of the easier kind of repetition. But what that means, going back to kind of full circle, is that, I think McKinsey did a study that about Black Americans are 10% more likely to lose their jobs to automation because they don't have the, complex skills to engage in, a digital, to engage in the digital workforce. And so not only do we need diverse groups building it so that way it can better respond to people of all colors and all abilities, but we also need to recognize that what's going to be great for a lot of people about AI is not going to be great for others. And so how do we prepare that part of the workforce to be resilient and to transition to other jobs that AI and automation may eventually support and replace?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And so I'll be really brief and just sake of time here. The CEO of ChatGPT, OpenAI is sitting right now in front of Congress talking about, AI, right? And the implications of AI. So that Senate hearing, that hearing is actually taking place as we speak here. AI, there's no question about it. The rapid advancement of AI has tremendous amount of possibilities, as Steve and Megan has pointed out, but it also can be exploited as well, right? The weaponization of AI is real. Now, it doesn't mean that Skynet is here, right? The Terminator, right, is around the corner. But what it does mean is that it creates this opportunity, right, for us to start thinking about how do we develop, how do we prioritize robust cybersecurity around AI, right? So how do we prevent things from unauthorized access? How do we prevent manipulation of data, right? So it avoids some of the things that Megan was pointing out around data poisoning, where you can create decisions, right, that are biased, as an example, right? How do you prevent the misuse of it? All of those things are real that we need to start thinking about, cybersecurity practitioners. So I would offer to you that AI development is not going away. It is here just to stay. Nation states, China in particular, has made it their sole mission to be an AI powerhouse. So we cannot sit on the sidelines, right? And simply say, we gotta, we'll think about it and we'll decide somewhere down the road. There are nation states right now that are pouring vast amounts of resources into AI. From a national perspective, we need to be there as well, but we need to ensure in transparency as we sort of move forward in determining how we develop and prioritize around our AI capabilities.
Thank you so much for that, Gary. And that's time for us. So does anyone have any closing remarks that they'd like to make before we end?
I'd like to thank you, Maggie, and for everything that you've done, and just great job to my fellow panelists here, Gary and Megan. Pleasure talking with you all.
Absolutely. There's so many more discussions to be had. Please reach out. I think I would offer any one of us, but particularly myself and CyberTrust, we want to engage in dialogues and partnerships with all, with all different types of organizations and people. So if you're interested in that, please reach out.
Yeah, and Maggie, I'll thank you as well. And I'll offer this. I'm growing up in Boston, been around this space. This is a unique place, right? Boston is special. Boston is special because we have great academic institutions. We've got great industries. And the reality is that we also have a government that is really willing to find ways to create more inclusivity, to create more equity. And we've got a long way to go, right? But the fact of the matter is that we're here today, right, because we're starting to take advantage of all of these resources and partnerships. And so CyberTrust Massachusetts and Bridgewater State University are examples, right, of what we're trying to create here in this Commonwealth. And I think that as we look forward, I think 5 years from now, we will see hopefully a strong pipeline of cybersecurity practitioners, a state that is first in the nation in terms of skilled workers, right? We can truly call ourselves a cyber state. And so that's what I'm excited about. That's what I'm looking forward to. And I applaud, again, CyberTrust Massachusetts and Bridgewater State University for sort of leading the charge on this, along with Mass Tech Collaborative.
And thank you all for your generous use of your time and for thanking me and for imparting your wisdom on our crowd. And I want to also take a moment to thank Globe Events for sponsoring the event, and thank our attendees for taking the time out of their busy days to share in this conversation with us. So with that, I believe that marks time for us exactly on the hour. We did very well, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.